Thank you for listening to this very special D-Day episode of UK Cinema History, where independent filmmaker Erin Brown takes us through Britain, film, and the Second World War. Take it away, Noel Coward.
Don't let's be beastly to the Germans. Now our victory is ultimately won. Let us treat them very kindly, as we would a valued friend. We might send them out some bishops as a form of lease and lend. Let's be sweet to them and day by day repeat to them that sterilization simply isn't done. Let's sweetly sympathize again and help the scum to rise again, but don't let's be beastly to the Hun.
Hello, I'm filmmaker and history nerd Erin Brown, and I'm going to be talking to you today about World War II in British film. The first British talkies came out in 1929, the first being The Clue of the New Pin, which included Sir John Gielgud in its cast. It was followed by Blackmail, one of Alfred Hitchcock's early films. Throughout the 1930s, cinema was a way of escaping the reality of the Great Depression. Between the lingering effects of World War I and the economic depression coming from America, and we're very sorry about that, in some areas, unemployment reached 70%. Particularly hard hit were the industrial and mining areas of Northern England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. While certain areas that produced newer technology, such as the automotive and electrical industries, experienced a boom, more traditional industries were facing greater and greater difficulties. However, there began to be more leisure time, and going to the cinema became one of, if not the most, popular forms of entertainment. The 1930s also brought a type of film known as quota quickies, which were low-budget films meant to fill quota obligations brought on by the Cinematograph Act of 1927. The act was intended to create a Hollywood-style studio system in Britain. The requirements were: A, the film must be made by a British or British-controlled company; B, studio scenes must be shot in a studio within the British Empire; C, the author of the screenplay or the original work the screenplay was based on must be by a British subject. C, the author of the screenplay or the original work the screenplay was based on must be a British subject. And D, 75% of salaries must be paid to British subjects, with an exception for up to 2 people, one of whom must be an actor, in order to allow an international director, producer, and/or star to be involved in the project. Excuse me. Initially, the quota was 7.5%, but it was raised to 20% in 1935. The act was ultimately repealed in 1960. Quota quickies are more complicated than the name implies. On one hand, many of them were low-budget, low-quality films just meant to get people into seats. On the other, directors such as David Lean and actors like James Mason learned their craft through these films. Comedies were very popular, especially the ones featuring George Formby. Formby, known for his ukulele and middle-class Lancashire demeanor, became the most popular entertainer in the UK in the 30s and 40s. His films gave a boost to civilian morale during the war. One film, Let George Do It, which was released in the US as To Hell with Hitler, who can argue with that, features him punching Hitler in the face. I mean, wouldn't you? Captain America did it. I would 100% punch Hitler square in the face, given the opportunity. Formby also worked extensively for charity during the war. He and his wife Beryl created the Jump Fund to provide balaclavas, scarves, and socks for the troops. And the oddly named OK Club for Kids, which was meant to send cigarettes to troops from Yorkshire. I don't understand the organization. I don't know why it's called that. I don't know why it's specifically Yorkshire, but there you go. He gave free concerts and raised money for charitable organizations and even joined the Home Guard. He attempted to enlist in active duty but was turned down for health reasons. Just as the war started in 1939, Charlie Chaplin began filming The Great Dictator, which parodied Hitler. It was a bold move, but necessary. Film is a very powerful medium, and Chaplin felt obligated to say something when the threat of fascism arose. We all fight in different ways, and this was his. The Great Dictator is significant for using satire to tear down Hitler's image. If you make someone laughable, it takes away their power. Mel Brooks did the same in The Producers in 1969, as did Taika Waititi in my very favorite war film, Jojo Rabbit, which I would talk about more, but it isn't a British film, so I'd only be shoehorning it in because I'm a little obsessed with Taika at the moment, so I need to stop talking. And after this, I'm going to go home and watch Our Flag Means Death again. Sorry. You should watch it too. Admittedly, The Great Dictator is an American film, but Chaplin himself was English, and the film was influential enough that I'm going to keep it in. The film was released in 1940. Initially, Britain wasn't going to allow it to be released there, but by the time it was completed, Britain had declared war and the policy of appeasing Hitler was over. It became the UK's second highest grossing film of 1940, coming in behind Gone with the Wind. When the war started in earnest, cinemas were initially closed to avoid becoming targets for air raids, but they were quickly reopened in order to keep public morale up. They were also recognized as a tool to spread propaganda. Propaganda is tricky. On one hand, you get things like Soviet-era Pravda or anything coming out of North Korea. On the other hand, you get, Make Do and Mend and Rosie the Riveter and Keep Calm and Carry On. The Ministry of Information, formed in 1939, the day after Britain declared war, took over the GPO Film Unit. Interestingly, the GPO Film Unit was a subdivision of the UK General Post Office. I don't know how film and post offices are related, but there you go. The ministry quickly shifted into making fiction and nonfiction films to spread information and boost morale, as well as public support for the war. One of the best-known actors to appear in these films was Leslie Howard, who was probably best known for playing Ashley Wilkes in Gone with the Wind. He had a very successful career in Britain and Hollywood in the 1930s, but when the war began, he returned to Britain permanently to help with the war effort. It was during a trip from Lisbon to try to sway neutral Portugal to the British side that his plane, Boeing Flight 777, carrying 13 civilian passengers and 4 crew members, was shot down by the Luftwaffe over the Bay of Biscay, killing all on board. This plane had been attacked twice before, in November of 1942 and April of 1943, but both times had escaped. Sadly, with the third attack on June 1st, 1943, their luck ran out. There's been a lot of speculation as to why this particular plane was shot down, including theories that Howard was the target, or that the Germans thought Winston Churchill was aboard, but ultimately it appears that it was just bad luck. One of the German pilots, in a secretly taped conversation, claimed that they had no idea who was aboard, but everything that crossed their path was shot down, civilian or not. Excuse me. 1944 saw the release of Sir Laurence Olivier's Henry V. In 1940, Olivier had attempted to gain a position in the Ministry of Information in order to assist with the war effort, but was told to stay in Hollywood. He was then connected to Hungarian-British director Alexander Korda, who directed him and his wife, Vivien Leigh, in That Hamilton Woman. The film was ostensibly a romance set during the Napoleonic Wars, but was very much paralleling the threat of Nazi Germany. After filming That Hamilton Woman, Olivier and Leigh returned to Britain, where Olivier intended to join the RAF. He had been taking flying lessons and had completed almost 250 hours in preparation. He was persuaded instead to continue making films. One of these, The 49th Parallel, also starred the aforementioned Leslie Howard. This film tells the story of a group of U-boat sailors stranded in Canada and attempting to escape to the then neutral United States. It was meant to build American sympathy for Britain, as well as scare the pants off the Americans, according to director Michael Powell. One actor, Anton Walbrook, donated half his pay from the film to the International Red Cross. Olivier, Howard, and Raymond Massey all agreed to work for half their usual rate in order to make sure the film was completed. The film was very well received, although in the United States, some of the more racist Nazi dialogue was cut to avoid offending segregationists in the American South, because reasons. In 1943, Olivier was asked to make Henry V by the Ministry of Information. This film was meant to be a morale booster and was filmed in Technicolor, with the only Technicolor camera in Britain at the time. The focus was on the bravery of the English troops under their heroic king. This was to tap into and amplify public sentiment for the royal family, who famously stayed in London during the Blitz. Throughout the war, the royal family had been following the same rationing as the rest of the public, made regular morale-boosting public visits around the country, and aided in the war effort. King George VI frequently visited the troops overseas, and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was deemed by Hitler to be the most dangerous woman in Europe due to her positive public image. Then Princess Elizabeth served as a mechanic and driver in the Auxiliary Territorial Service. In order to capitalize on the royal family's popularity, various changes were made to the script. Certain passages that were critical of Henry's behavior were removed, allegedly on the advice of Winston Churchill. Olivier also removed some of Henry's less noble actions, such as executing French prisoners and threatening to send his troops to rape and pillage the city of Harfleur. The release of the film occurred as Allied forces fought to liberate France, so other changes were made to show the French in a more sympathetic light. Post-war recovery took some time. Rationing didn't completely end until 1954. Film remained a very popular and affordable entertainment option. However, the quality of the films declined, and television became more affordable, so that by 1960, cinema admission was a third of what it had been in 1951. The most popular genre was war films, and the most successful of these was 1957's Bridge on the River Kwai. While many British war films featured traditional social hierarchy, stiff upper lip heroism, and doing your bit for king and country winning the day, Bridge on the River Kwai focused more on how war affects the individuals involved. Colonel Saito and Colonel Nicholson found a common goal, to complete the bridge, but for very different reasons. If the bridge wasn't completed, Saito faced seppuku to preserve his honor. Nicholson wanted to prove the superiority of British engineering, as well as maintaining discipline. While his fellow officers objected to his single-mindedness as aiding the enemy, Nicholson considered it his duty to one-up the Japanese. The film was not historically accurate, and many former POWs objected to the idea of British troops helping the Japanese, as they had all done their best to sabotage their work, as the British troops did in the film before Nicholson put a stop to it. But it did hint toward the coming anti-war sentiment. Plenty of people agreed that war is bad, but how can you complain about stopping Hitler? You can't. He was an evil dickhead who deserved so much worse than just a self-inflicted bullet to the brain. But the world was still unsettled, and at this point, people were able to begin to reflect on the reality of war. And then the 1960s happened. The 60s were very much a time of change. As Britain recovered from the war, the babies born in the 40s and 50s were growing up, and their parents, having lived through the hardship of the war, wanted to give them an easier life than they had had. This generation had significantly more freedom, and they brought cultural change. Music, art, and film all flourished in this new era. On the BFI's list of the top 100 British films, 26 were from the 60s. Things were changing socially as well. With the Profumo scandal, people began to lose trust in the establishment. And although Britain had no direct involvement in Vietnam, it was a very deeply unpopular war, and there were protests worldwide. Some of this change can be seen in 1965's The Hill, directed by Stanley Lumet and starring Sean Connery. While there were similarities between this and Bridge on the River Kwai in that both were character studies taking place in prison camps, The Hill was a vastly different film. This told the story of 5 prisoners in a British Army military prison in Libya. Wilson, the regimental sergeant major in charge of the guards, believes his role is to break down bad soldiers and turn them into good ones. This is done through various punishments, such as climbing a man-made hill in the center of the camp, which is what gives the film its title. A new guard, Williams, is assigned to the 5 new prisoners and takes no time forcing them to run up and down the hill. He takes an immediate dislike to Roberts, Sean Connery's character, and while the other 4 are sent up the hill 6 times, Roberts is made to run for half an hour. A fellow guard, Harris, tries to get Williams to take it easy on the new men, but Williams is all about getting a promotion, and by both attempting to impress Wilson and trying to undermine him. Ultimately, one of the 5 men dies of heat stroke, which leads to a power struggle among the guards, Wilson, and the unnamed medical officer who cleared all 5 men for punishment. Sidney Lumet had a very unique style. The Hill was shot in black and white, made extensive use of handheld shots, and had no music whatsoever. There's an argument scene at the end of the film where the actors are all looking directly into the camera, making you feel like you're part of the argument as well. That part is kind of hard to watch, since I'm not great at eye contact. Even looking at someone's face in a picture weirds me out. In another scene, Williams forces one of the men to run up the hill wearing a gas mask, so it's a handheld shot with mat superimposed to seem like you're looking through the mask. The sound is dominated by heavy breathing, with all other sounds muffled. All of this serves to bring you more into the film to feel like you're really there with these men. Lumet also frequently had anti-establishment themes in his film. Serpico and Dog Day Afternoon are great examples of this. This one is no exception. The officers are incompetent, Wilson is a tyrant, and Williams is a scheming little bastard. Only Harris shows any compassion toward the prisoners. This is in direct contrast to Bridge on the River Kwai, where the British soldiers held their officers in high regard even when they were wrong. The film was not a commercial success, but it did well critically, and the screenplay by Ray Rigby won Best Screenplay at Cannes in 1965. I suspect that while social attitudes were changing, they hadn't quite gotten to the point in 1965 to make this one an audience favorite. Later the same year saw the release of a more traditional war film, The Heroes of Telemark, about Norwegian resistance fighters sabotaging Nazi plans to build an atom bomb. That one went on to become one of the top 15 most popular films in Britain in 1966. Sometimes you want to see an in-depth character study, and sometimes you just want to see people kill Nazis. Always punch Nazis. So now we get to the 1970s, which is going to be tricky for me because I'm a little obsessed with how unique an era the 70s were for American films. I could talk about The Godfather Parts 1 and 2, not 3, for days. There were certainly bad films, and weird genres, like all of a sudden we kept having disaster movies with every celebrity they could cast in them, such as The Poseidon Adventure or Airport. Also, Star Wars. That happened. But the decade started out with anti-war films set in previous wars, such as Catch-22, set in World War II, and MASH, set in the Korean War. This sentiment carried over to British films as well. Stuart Cooper's 1975 film Overlord features historical footage mixed with fictional scenes to tell the story of a young soldier taking part in the D-Day invasion, also known as Operation Overlord. The new footage was shot in 10 days, with period lenses and special lighting to match the archival footage. Initially, Cooper wanted to make a documentary, but then came up with the story of this young everyman soldier as a way of reminding us that the people killed in war weren't just nameless troops, they were living, breathing human beings. War films were becoming less popular, however, and the British film industry was starting to go into a slump. Films such as A Bridge Too Far and Forced 10 from Navarone, a sequel to 1961's The Guns of Navarone, were met with mixed reviews and limited commercial success. In 1980, only 31 films were made in Britain, the lowest number since 1914. This was partially due to the repeal of the Eady levy, which allowed foreign film companies to write off a large amount of production costs if they filmed in the UK. Things did begin to look up as the decade went on, and in 1987, the John Boorman comedy drama Hope and Glory was released. Instead of focusing on the soldiers doing the fighting, this film tells the story of a young boy living in London during the Blitz. It's based off of John Boorman's experiences as a child and taps strongly into nostalgia. A critical and commercial success, it was nominated for 5 Oscars and was named one of the best films of 1987. Nostalgia for the 1940s became a thing in the 90s, at least in America. I distinctly remember the 20 minutes or so that swing dancing made a comeback. This was an era when the baby boomer generation was remembering their childhoods and losing their parents, so a glorified version of the wartime era started coming back. These are the folks who defeated Hitler, after all, so there began to be a shift from films as war protests to films as war memorials. The joint British-American film Memphis Belle, released in 1990 and directed by Michael Caton Jones, is a good example of this. It's about a B-17 bomber crew on their 25th and final mission before being sent home, the first crew in their squadron to achieve this. While there really was a Memphis Belle that really did successfully fly 25 missions, the film is only loosely based on fact. There was quite a bit of wouldn't it be cool if to the story. But that's okay. The point of the film isn't complete historical accuracy, it's to be entertaining. And the overall feel is that war is hell, but our boys are brave. It received mixed reviews, but did well with audiences. More recent World War II films are less nostalgic and frequently focus on individuals with the war as a backdrop. The English Patient was hugely successful, as was The King's Speech in 2010. While war films are still being made, they aren't as big as they were in the 1950s. Times change, and art changes with it. The last decade has shown a disturbing rise in right-wing ideology. If we're lucky, maybe upcoming war films will address the foolishness of fascism the way The Great Dictator did. Regardless, there are plenty more excellent British films in our future. So that about wraps it up. I hope you all enjoyed my rambling nerdery. I'm Erin Brown, filmmaker and history nerd, and thank you for listening.
Don't let's be beastly to the Germans. You can't deprive a gangster of his gun. Though they've been a little naughty to the Czechs and Poles and Dutch, I can't believe those countries really minded very much. Let's be free with them and share the BBC with them. We mustn't prevent them basking in the sun. Let's soften their defeat again and build their bloody fleet again, but don't let's be beastly to the Hun.
Thank you again for listening to UK Cinema History. If you want to join the conversation, follow the link in the episode description. Every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we record these episodes live on the Clubhouse app. Hope to see you there. And while you're listening, please rate us and review us on your favorite podcaster. It'd be doing us a great favor. And thanks again.